What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Rock Your Brand podcast. And today I am fired up because, well, we are going to be talking about something that we get asked quite often and something that we've been toying with ourselves. And we've also had experience with this, and that is selling on Etsy versus selling on Shopify. And that's something that I think we need to talk about because there are pros and there are cons to both of these platforms. And we want to really break it down and share with you what they are. When is the right time to start on Etsy, or when is the right time to start on Shopify? Should you start on Shopify first and then go to Etsy, or maybe the other way around? So those are what we're going to be talking about as far as topics today on this episode. And well, Chris, let's kind of get into this thing and let's kind of dig in. So what are your thoughts as far as Shopify, Etsy? Just give me your like 10,000 foot view, and then we'll just dig in and we'll start addressing, the common questions, but also the pros and the cons.
Yeah, and actually, Gail just said this is great timing. I'm trying to decide this. And Gail, I'm hoping that we can help you with that, as well as everybody that's listening to this, one, with us live, but two, obviously on the podcast in the future, hanging out on YouTube or in the Facebook group over at brandcreators.com/group. Scott, for me, this is not necessarily an either or thing. And I think the way that both you and I think about this is that these really are two separate things entirely. But the way that they're typically talked about in like the print on demand or online business community is that they are an interchangeable thing, kind of like what we talked about a few weeks ago, the Amazon versus Etsy debate, right? And there are a lot of things that you can that you need to consider when you're looking at Shopify versus Etsy that you don't necessarily have to take into consideration with the Amazon versus Etsy, or like Redbubble versus Etsy merch, right. Like any of those other things.
Right.
They both have a lot of pros, and quite honestly, they both have some cons that we need to think about. Mm-hmm. And I think the answer at the end of the day, and as we chat through this, we're going to, come to that conclusion. But in my mind, the answer is both, but it's just where we start and how we get started. And my goal, at least for today, is to walk through the pros and cons of each so that you can make the decision about which to start with, and then figure out kind of the order of operations, right? Do I start with Shopify? Do I start with Etsy? And then based on where my business is, when do I add the other one in? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's the question. And here's what I want to do though, before we even dig into the pros and the cons, is I want to really have people understand what the two platforms are and how they operate. So the one, I think, misconception that I hear people when they're starting print on demand, digital products, doesn't matter, physical products, could be anything, right? They're thinking to themselves, what one should I start on? Because I hear everything's great about Etsy, but I hear everything great about Shopify. And I see the commercials on TV. It says, start your own business, start a Shopify store and all of this, right? And so here's the difference, okay? Here is the big difference that we need to understand. And this is the biggest one out of everything that I can share with you here today. This is the number one thing that is different and why they are not necessarily the same. Etsy is like Amazon, is like eBay. It already has an audience. It already has people searching to buy things. People have already been conditioned to buy things. They trust Etsy. They trust the people on there that have reviews and that have good seller ratings and all of those things. That's all baked into Etsy, right? So in a sense, what you're doing is you're coming to their platform. You have this flow of traffic and you're trying to get in front of that traffic because it's already there. And we're doing our research to see like what is searched for and what products are selling well and what niches are doing good and all of these things. Now let's talk a little bit about Shopify. And really that is a hosting for your business is really what it is. It's not a baked in audience. It doesn't, you don't put your products on your Shopify store and all of a sudden it's now being shown. You're not ranking inside of a platform of people typing in, best Father's Day gift or something like that, right? You have to go out and get all that stuff. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So just to be very, very clear, if you are starting from scratch, they are not the same thing. Okay. There is going to be other things you're going to have to do with a Shopify that is going to allow you to get the same kind of traffic and that type of traffic, right? So it really does come down to they're different in a sense because Etsy has the traffic. Shopify does not have the traffic. You have to get the traffic. Chris, did I do a good job explaining that?
You did. And I think the Shopify doesn't do themselves any favors here because they do market themselves as a platform, right? They have a fulfillment network. They have Shop Pay, right? So like if somebody's ever bought from a Shopify store before, and you go to buy from another Shopify store, they like load in your buyer details and they do all of those kinds of things. And the way that Shopify is talked about a lot of times, Scott, is that it is a platform, but it's not, right? It is a place where you can build a website, but Shopify is no different than WooCommerce, or if you're deeper into the e-commerce world, BigCommerce, Magento, right? Any of these kinds of things where it allows you to create a website that then takes orders, but it doesn't do anything else. And the way that it's talked about in the print-on-demand world, and to some fault of Shopify's own marketing, it's often perceived that way. If I launch a Shopify business, right? Because that's what everybody says, I have an Amazon business, I have an Etsy business. No, you have a store on their platform, right? If I launch a Shopify business, then sales are going to come in. And that's not necessarily true. Yes, eventually you're going to rank and you're going to get some organic traffic and all of those kinds of things. But it's very different from Etsy in that Etsy has built-in traffic. Etsy has a way to monitor what your competition is doing, to gauge sales, to understand what niches are like and what people are going to buy in those niches on those sites, right? And you don't have that on Shopify. And that's, before we even dive into the pros and cons, that's not a pro or a con, right? Because how we deal with that and the value to our business long-term is where that pro or con could come in. But it's an important starting position. Whereas these things are always talked about as being the same, and they are not, right? The better comparison would probably be like Pattern from Etsy versus Shopify, but that's not how this is discussed. So that's kind of what we wanted people to know upfront before we jump in. They're not the same thing. Etsy has built-in traffic. Shopify does not.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to bring that up in the beginning, because that is something that I think people are like, thinking to themselves sometimes, not always, but they're like, what one should I start on? I'm thinking about starting Shopify because I want to get all my stuff there and then I'll put it up on Etsy. But not knowing that you're probably going to get a bigger head start if you go where the traffic already is flowing. So that's just why I wanted to bring that up. So anyone that has been thinking to themselves, like, what one should I start first? Just understand those are some things to consider, because you don't have built-in traffic with Shopify. You do have it with Etsy. So just keep that in mind. All right. So let's dig into the pros and cons. I'm going to start with Etsy, and I am going to start with the pros of selling on Etsy. And the very first one we just talked about, search traffic. Etsy brings the awareness. Etsy brings traffic. Okay. They're doing advertising on TV. They're doing advertising. I don't know. Maybe they're running ads, right? And they do run ads, but they're not running it necessarily directly for Etsy. They're doing it for products and things, but sometimes they run dedicated ads to Etsy. I know I've seen them on TV, but they're bringing awareness, right? People talk about it. They say, where'd you get that? I got it on Etsy, right? So then people are going to this platform and they're searching for things. And the one place that people go, Etsy, for gifts, I would say probably trumps any other platform out there. I think it's a gift giving platform as far as people searching for gift for. If you go to their homepage, you'll see that they'll have gift ideas on the front page. It's usually the thing that they're really focusing on. So the very first thing is search traffic. They have it. They have a lot of it. And we get to get in front of that. So that's a pro. The second pro is you don't need any web hosting. You literally can get started like immediately, and it's super simple to get started. I mean, you literally just sign up, set it up and then start listing products that cost you 20 cents for 3 months. That's it. So no web hosting. And if you don't know what web hosting is, it's like a hosting company to host your website. In this case, if we were talking about Shopify, you would pay Shopify a monthly fee to host your store. Okay. So hosting means that it's just going to be live on the internet, and that's kind of where it resides. The third thing, the pro, is you don't need any web design skills. Okay. So if you've ever opened up a Shopify store, you're pretty much going to start with a blank slate. You do have some themes, but then when you're into the themes, then you're going to be trying to modify and tweak and all these things. Etsy actually makes it very simple. They don't give you a lot of options. You have a handful that you're able to modify and to really customize. And it's like the banner, you can customize that, right? Your profile picture, your logo. And then inside of your listing, there's really not a lot you're going to customize other than your pictures. Like that's really it. And maybe just the style of your writing and things, but there's no widgets or there's no special things that you're going to put in there that not everyone else has the ability to have as well. But you don't have to worry about those things. So you don't have to worry about being a great web designer to where it's going to work well on mobile or if it's going to work well on desktop. That's all optimized for you. So that's another pro on getting started using Etsy. The fourth thing is you don't need a merchant account. So a merchant account allows you to basically collect payments, get paid. Okay. Now, years ago, I mean, I've been at this for almost 20 years. When I launched my first website, it was so hard to get a merchant account approved to collect a credit card payment. Nowadays, it's literally part of Etsy. Like you don't even have to do anything. PayPal makes it easy nowadays too. Like there's a lot of other ones out there now. It's so easy, but Etsy has it built in. So when you sign up, you list a product, guess what? You don't have to worry about a merchant account. It's all built in. The other pro is marketing tools. Okay. You don't need to worry about in the beginning. I am a believer in using tools after the fact, but built-in marketing tools, we're talking about people can favorite your stuff. Okay. And then when they favorite your stuff, they're going to get notifications about your stuff, right? They can favorite either an item or they can favorite your store, your shop. If someone abandons a cart, they want to buy it, but they don't actually check out yet. We can send emails to those people. That's all automated. Like all of this stuff is normally, if you're going to do that within Shopify, you're going to have to put a plugin in there. You're going to have to set up some other type of automation, and you're going to have to kind of deal with all that. It's all built in. It's all baked in. You can run ads on Etsy that are all kind of built in. You don't have to worry about learning Google ads or any of the other ad platforms, Facebook or any of that stuff. You can, maybe later you will, but you don't have to. It's all baked in. And then the last thing is just simplicity. It's easy to launch products. I mean, super easy. And that's why I think they are really for the beginner, because all you really need to do is come up with some good products for a certain niche and create a good listing with some optimization. And we've talked about that here on the YouTube channel and the podcast, and then launch products and then learn as you go. You don't have to worry about all that other stuff. All right. So those are the pros. Chris, anything you want to mention on the pros before I get into the cons of Etsy?
No, I think the biggest thing there, and I have some nits to pick with some of the pros in terms of how it compares to some of the things that we see on Shopify, right? But I think those would actually be pros and cons. Like it's a pro con for Etsy, right? Sometimes they make things so simple that it's too simple, right? From a marketing perspective, but we'll get into that when we get there. The biggest thing I want people to understand with Etsy is if I were getting started, Etsy is the easiest thing to get started with. Why? You don't have to have any marketing skills. You don't have to have any web design or like understand what the phrase web host means. The simplicity of Etsy is kind of the elegance and the beauty of the platform, right? If you have an idea for a product and you can use ChatGPT to create a product description, right? Even if you can't write it yourself, then you can launch and make sales of a product on Etsy. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's so attractive to people, Scott, is that you don't need web design skills. You don't need hosting. You don't need a separate merchant account. You don't need to learn anything really about marketing, because they build in some of the conversion rate optimization features, right? Those abandoned carts, favorites, the ability to send promotional emails or promotional push notifications. Some of those things are built right into Etsy. And they're giving you kind of bird's eye view, right? The 5,000 foot view of all of the marketing things that you should be doing if you have your own e-commerce store. They give you the ability to kind of put your foot in the water, right? With some of those kinds of things without it being an overwhelming experience. Mm-hmm. That is, to me, the number one reason people should be looking at Etsy is they give you a platform, they give you traffic, and they let you start to experiment with all of the things that a real business would be doing if they were selling online, without having to worry about the nitty gritty marketing automation, like stuff, the stuff that I do on a daily basis, right? You don't have to do or know any of those things to be able to launch a store on Etsy, which is an amazing opportunity for people.
Yeah. I mean, it takes the barrier to entry so low, right? And to someone to be like, well, then everybody can launch. Well, yes, but then we have to talk about, you still need to have a good niche that is in demand. They're selling products on a regular basis, or even if it's not on a regular basis, there's a good fourth quarter or a good, second quarter or something like that, where that there's demand there for your niche and all of that.
I think that's another thing, and that's not specifically on the list of things that we were just going through, but the ability to know what does and does not sell on the platform is an extreme shortcut, right? Like, you could launch 1 million products anywhere else on the internet, and there's not a way to gauge demand. But on Etsy, we know upfront what that demand looks like for that specific product type or that specific niche, right? And we can use a tool like Everbee, right? Or eRank, or any of the other tools that are out there, to be able to understand what people are already buying on the platform and make our version of that, so that we're not guessing when it comes to sales.
Yeah, well, and that's a great point. I use that analogy in one of my recent videos on YouTube. And basically it was this: imagine being able to go down the road to your competitor and to be able to know what kind of sales they've generated, even an estimate of that. And it's really hard. Like, I can't go down to the local brewery and know an estimation of like what they generate in a day, right? I don't know that, right? But we're able to do that now, and especially with a tool that we can now look at their data. Now, if even on Shopify, there's not really anything that we're going to be able to do, at least that I'm not aware of, but that you're going to be able to kind of see sales numbers, because there's a lot of other variables too. Like, a lot of times with Shopify, they're, generating sales through, ads and things like that. So it's really hard. We can see maybe their best seller. We can see that because they're going to probably put their best seller up there because they want to show people, but I don't know the numbers, right? So that is a huge benefit, I think, of being able to shortcut and get started. And really, the way I look at it is like, Etsy's a great starting place just to get started and kind of get your feet wet. And then you gradually start learning some marketing stuff. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I like that brewery analogy. And Scott, to me, it's even more than knowing everything that the brewery is selling. It's knowing that as a new brewer, right, the demand in the market is 80% for IPAs. So that's gonna be the first thing that I brew, obviously, because no one is buying my, my summer or whatever at the brewery that already exists. So I'm not going to start with that. I'm going to start with the thing that is already being sold. And that's something you can do on Etsy. Huge. You cannot do that in the standard e-commerce world, be it Shopify, WooCommerce, Magento. You can go to a website, you can do some very rough estimates based on traffic, right? But you're not going to know average cart value. You're not going to know the most popular products. You're not going to know any of those kinds of things. And you do get that built in from day one with Etsy, because everything is relative, right? Products that rank higher sell more. And there's been a lot of tools, especially something like Everbee, which we found to be the most accurate, that give us the ability to understand exactly what is selling in each and every niche. And that data, for somebody getting started, again, just making it as easy as you can to make that first sale, that first 10 sales, that first 100 sales, that's a tool and an ability that I think is often overlooked by people, because they say, oh, well, I'll go to Etsy, look at what's selling, and then just put it on my Shopify store. Well, you can do that, but it's selling on Etsy because the traffic is built in, right? So we have to kind of take the whole pie together. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. And, I probably should throw a little shameless plug in here for Everbee because we're a huge fan of it. Right, Chris? And this wasn't even planned either, but you can try it for free. brandcreators.com/Everbee. And I believe you get 10 searches to look at sales per month. So you can try it for free. There you go. Little shameless plug. All right. So let's keep moving here. So let's talk about the cons of Etsy. Let's talk about the cons. I got 5 here. The first con is you do not own the customer data. Now, this goes with pretty much every platform. Now, I will say this. Etsy is a little bit better about allowing us to connect to our customer than Amazon is. And for those of you that don't know, Chris and I have sold on Amazon for years. Right now, we're not currently anymore. We sold our last e-com business about 3-4 years ago and basically got off of Amazon. Not saying I'll never go back, but the point is on Etsy, they're giving us or allowing us to collect emails, which is connected with Aweber. If you're not doing that yet, I do strongly suggest that you do that. So they do allow us to do that, but we're not really supposed to do any other marketing to them other than about our Etsy stuff. That's technically the way it's supposed to be. All right. But we don't own that customer. Okay. We can't take that customer and bring them over to another platform technically. Okay. So that's the one downside. That's the con. The second thing is Etsy can shut our account down like that, blink of an eye. Okay. And sometimes for no reason, they just can. Okay. Now, a lot of times it's going to be a violation, or for new people, they always panic about this. And I see this happening a lot. On a new account, you may get your account suspended or paused until they verify your banking information. This is very common, happens a lot. So if that did happen to you, don't worry about it. You're not alone. It does happen to a lot of people. And then usually it'll come right back in about a week after everything's been verified. They just want to make sure that obviously it's legit and everything matches up. But for the most part, if you stay, keeping yourself where you're not violating any trademarks and you're not selling any Taylor Swift stuff. I just did a video on that. That'll be coming out next week. Guys, stay away from the trademark stuff, please. But yeah, you can get shut down for that and suspended or banned and never be able to sell on the platform again. So they can do that. Okay. And they can do it sometimes for something that you don't even agree with. You're like, well, that's not that big of a deal. They're like, sorry, you're done. All right. So that can happen. The third thing is you can't sell your business. And that is a big one for me, to be honest with you. But I'm willing to sacrifice that right now because I'm building awareness for a brand. I'm able to do it. It's very easy, low maintenance. And I am able to now collect emails of my customers. And if for some reason I wanted to sell my business, and I do have a Shopify attached, which we'll talk about, now I have something that I can sell tangibly with that Etsy side. I can still sell my products. I can give all my products to someone to sell and they can have to re-upload them to a new shop. But Etsy does not allow you to sell your shop, which I don't know why. Okay. But they don't. Okay. So that's a con. The fourth thing is there's not really good tracking if you want to do any type of external ads or if you want to push people from social media or any of that stuff. So there's not really a lot of tracking there. It may come one day, but it's not there right now. So if you are running external traffic to Etsy, it's really hard to track. So that's a con. If you're using Shopify, you'd be able to do that. And then the fifth thing is you're just limited on the customization. Right? So you might want to jazz it up a little bit more than they give you. You can't. There's no you can go in and create some a certain way that your images come up on the screen, or that you have people go through your funnel as far as your cross sell, upsell, all of that stuff. You can't do that. You have to kind of take what they give you, and that's it. So you are limited on the customization on what you can do. So those are the cons. Not that bad, but they are cons. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's two in there that I wanted to address, and then I had two more that I wanted to kind of throw in, right? The first thing, Scott, and it's almost a deal breaker for me if it wasn't for the ability to be able to connect emails and build the email list, really is that you can't sell the business. Now, that is, in my opinion, going to change at some point because Etsy is shifting more towards allowing brands onto the platform. And they're doing a lot of things specifically to help brands market more on the platform. And I have a feeling originally it was because, well, that just kind of makes sense, right? Everything originally on Etsy was handmade. And unless you're passing down your artisan knowledge about how to make a quilted blown glass bottle or whatever, right? I know that's not a thing, people. That's not necessarily something that you'd be able to transfer. They wouldn't be able to verify the quality, any of those kinds of things. Now that they allow print on demand and some other product types onto the platform, I do see that going away at some point, but it is still a limitation. And so, Scott, one of the things that you and I talked about was if you're doing this for consistent income, right? If you're doing this as a revenue stream, then Etsy makes a lot of sense. If you're doing this to build a business as an asset, Etsy by itself doesn't. We're going to need to bolt on something like Shopify, something like that eventually, right? If you want to build a business that you'll be able to sell for a big payday one day. But if you're just doing this as a consistent revenue stream, not necessarily a deal breaker, right? You also mentioned no tracking for external ads. All of their analytics are getting a lot better than they were even a year ago. But it's still not great. And you actually used to have even more control over it than you do now because you used to be able to integrate Google Analytics, which you can't do anymore, which is mind-boggling to me. But that's neither here nor there, right? We know Etsy has great external ads tracking on their side because they have external ads that they run to drive traffic for sellers. And so it's just a question of if or when they decide that that's something that is easy enough to use that they roll it out. And Scott, that comes down to one of the things I wanted to add, which is one of the pros is that they do give you a lot of built-in marketing tools like the favorites, abandoned carts, right? The ability to send coupons, the ability to send push notifications when you run a promotion, some of those kinds of things. But they are very limited on what they do. And the reason for that is they want to make everything usable by a person who is not a marketing person, but is more of a person who's blowing glass or knitting or whatever, right? Just an average person that doesn't have $100 million in pay-per-click spend, right? And so that is also a downside to me because they're missing a lot of the data. Now, again, they're getting better about this with like the beta search analytics and some of those kinds of things. They're missing a lot of the data that would help sellers sell more on the platform. The things that I've done on a daily basis, like in the e-commerce marketing side of the things that I do, right? The conversion rate optimization checklist. Okay, well, they're coming in here, they're leaving here, maybe they're adding it to the cart. Okay, the add to cart, abandoned cart email goes out from Etsy, but we only get one touch. I can't send a sequence, right? Some of those kinds of things that would help us make more sales are missing from the platform because it's designed to be simple and easy to use, right? All of the reasons why we like it. This one to me is also a reason why I have some issue with it, right? I'm not saying don't use it, but just keep that in mind that as we start to grow in this business, once we get past those first 5, 10, 100 sales, and we really want to understand what is working and what is not, that is missing from the Etsy platform currently. And then the other thing I wanted to add to that, Scott, was there are very limited types of things that you can sell on Etsy, right? It has to be handmade or made by you or print on demand. You can't sell anything that's mass produced, anything like that. And so if you do have a product that would be a good addition to your product line that you want to private label or that you just can't make in your garage or wherever, you can't sell that on the Etsy platform. And that to me it's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? It helps us really keep narrowed on who the customers are on Etsy, but it also limits the growth of our businesses because we have to stick to either print on demand or a handmade thing within the platform. And I don't, I'm not necessarily advocating that they open this to everyone everywhere, that it becomes the next Amazon, but it is something that we have to keep in mind, again, just from a growth limitation perspective down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that they're definitely going to be rolling out more things too. I definitely think that they've definitely improved even on their Etsy ads. They've updated what they're giving you as far as data to help you. So I like that they are, and when they do make these changes, they're very subtle. They're very useful most of the time, but they're also doing it because they don't want to overwhelm. They don't want people to get so confused that they don't know how to use it. Like I would say, if you go to Amazon and you want to run pay-per-click over there, it started out like that, and then it got really, really complicated. Now you could get as complicated as you want, but they did give you so much that you could do that now all of a sudden you needed these mass spreadsheets and you needed to basically sort everything and you needed to manage it. You needed a tool to manage it and all of these things.
I think again, that's like the blessing and the curse thing, right?
Yeah.
Etsy does things very differently than, let's say, Amazon or Facebook, right? If you guys have ever had a Facebook page or run a Facebook ad, you will know that from one day to the next, the entire ad creation, ad launch analytics process can change from step 1 to step 10 in an afternoon because they decided to roll out a new version. Etsy, to this point, has not done that. And what they do is they kind of stair step there. So some of these things that we're citing as limitations, like we said, they're already getting a little bit better. I'd like to see them give us more data, because if they give us more data, we can help them gain a higher percentage by making more sales, right? But they also have to keep in mind that not everybody is a data nerd like me, right? Where I know what to look at. I know exactly how to analyze all those reports.
Right.
I know what the marketing terminology is, right? For like visits versus views versus all of these things, which a lot of people don't want to think about. They just want to know, I put up 10 products, I made 15 sales today. Awesome. Right. And that's cool. But when we start trying to grow this, that's when we need to get a little nerdy and look at the numbers. And that's where that limitation is currently.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. All right, cool. Let's move on to Shopify, the pros and the cons. So I've got 4 pros. Number 1 is you own your website. So you have full control. Okay. And I say you own it. Technically, you don't, because you're hosting it. And if you wanted to move it, I don't think that you'd be able to really move that existing one over to another host. You could take it and model it and probably bring it over to another type of e-commerce theme and then update it, but it would be a hassle. Okay. So when you are on Shopify, you're basically buying into their platform, and their platform and all of their plugins and tools. It's very similar to WordPress. So if you're on WordPress for publishing content, like blog content, once you get on WordPress, it is easier to kind of transition off of that to something else, but it's never easy to go from like another blogging platform over to WordPress, because it doesn't align well. So it's very similar. So when you do go in on Shopify, you're kind of like saying, I'm going to build this thing on here with the idea of always having it on this platform. So you own that, but you technically don't. And what I mean by owning it is you could totally take that thing, build it up, and then sell it. So you do, in a sense, own, kind of like you would on a home, right? You don't really own it. You still pay taxes, but you can sell it and make some equity on it. So the second thing is you create the marketing. You create the upsells, the cross sells, the bumps, all of the different things. And if you don't know what that means, you don't need to right now, but it's kind of like going to I'll give you a great example. If you've ever purchased anything from like Vistaprint, okay, which is like business cards and letterheads and all that stuff, you'll put your design in there to get one thing, and then it'll give you a whole bunch of other things with it printed on. That's more or less like you could call it a bump, or you can just call it cross-selling, right? And so what that does is it allows you to kind of look at it. I know another one, GoDaddy, does it, right? You go there and it's like, I want to buy the domain name for, whatever, $9. But then on the way out, it's like, do you want email with that? Do you want, a website with that? Like, all of these other things that you might be interested in. Well, Etsy kind of does it for us, which is cool. But when you're on a platform like Shopify, you have full control of that. So you can build out a nice little funnel. If this person does this, have them do this. And then you can get into some complicated email systems. So that way you're able to say, well, this person hasn't gotten an email in 10 days and they purchased, 10 days ago, and they need to replenish their food that they purchased for their dog. Like, I'm just making stuff up, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, those are things that you can do, but a lot of thought goes into that. A lot of setup goes into that, but you are able to do that. Okay. That's the cool thing about it. You are able to create that journey. Okay. That buyer experience for your customers. All right. So you get to create those. The other thing is, the pro is, you own the customer data. So anybody that comes into that, website, you're collecting. You have full access to it. You can even put a pixel on there from Facebook, start building an audience and all that stuff. Can't do that with Etsy right now. Okay. So that's another cool thing. Obviously we can collect emails. We can put an email opt-in in there and all of that stuff. We can do all that stuff. And there's no limitations there. And the fourth thing, and this is a big one, is you can sell your business. Okay. So that's the pro. Like if you want to take this thing and it's going to take you longer probably to get traffic. It's going to take you longer to start getting sales. It's going to, because you have to kind of get all that stuff going, right? You got to get the awareness, the traffic. You got to learn Facebook ads. You got to learn Google ads, all of these different things. But in the long term, it would be worth it because you're going to be able to sell that if you want to, right? And now it becomes an asset that is sellable. So you're building something. It's going to take a little longer to do it. You're not tapping into a traffic source that's already there, but you are able to sell that business, which is a big deal. All right. So those are the pros that I got. Chris, what do you got?
I like that you started with the fact that you own everything, right? And yes, Scott, to your point, there is a little nuance to that in that Shopify does use kind of their own custom code language, right? They use a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, but they also use Liquid, which is not a language that's used by most other e-commerce platforms. So you wouldn't just be able to like download your website off of Shopify and move it to WordPress and be able to sell through WooCommerce. But you own all of the data that goes into that. And there's enough people that have done this now that there are like I'm sure there's a WooCommerce plugin that would allow you to take all of that and have it reformatted into just, to the JavaScript type stuff that WordPress is built off of. But you do own it, and it's something that is yours to do with what you will. And Scott, again, like that's both the blessing and the curse, right? Because you have full control over it, you can get in and tweak all of the knobs and do all of those kinds of things. But you're also responsible for all of that, and we'll get into that here when we get into the cons. But one of the biggest things for me that you touched on, but I wasn't sure if you fully covered, was it's easier to have repeat buyers and higher average cart values in a system like Shopify than it is on Etsy. And the reason for that is you own the customer data, right? Scott, to your point, I know every item that someone bought. I know when they bought it. I know when they should be buying it again because that's my data. And I can actively market to them to be able to do that. I can also put them into a subscription, which I can't do on Etsy, right? Like there's a bunch of things that we can do that make our jobs a lot easier. We can also say, hey, if you like this, you might also like this. It's not just up to the Etsy algorithm to suggest another product when somebody's getting ready to make the purchase, which is when they're most likely to make the biggest purchase, right? Yeah. Is right there at the checkout. We say, hey, I don't have my dancing avocado mug here with me today, but do you like the dancing avocado mug? You might love the bowling avocado mug, right? And we can increase cart value that way intentionally rather than relying on the good graces of the Etsy algorithm gods to give us, that little extra bump or to make sure that our other products are in front of people. A lot of times on a platform like Etsy, they might buy more than one product, but they might only be buying one thing from you because everything is owned by a different shop on Etsy. If they're buying more than one thing on Shopify, they're buying both of those things from you. The other thing that I wanted to mention, Scott, is there's actually fewer fees on the Shopify side, right? So there is, I think it's $29 a month is their starter plan right now, at least the last time that I looked. But the only fee you pay when you make a sale is, and they don't call it a transaction fee, but it's the credit card processing fee, which for Shopify payments, which is their built-in credit card transaction service, is 2.9 plus 30 cents, which in most cases is going to work out to be cheaper than what you're paying to Etsy in fees. Now, a lot of people take that and they go, I'm going to save a bunch of money and move over. Well, okay, you have to remember that Etsy is doing more than Shopify is doing to get those percentage of the fees, right? Shopify, the only thing they're doing is they're giving you the land to build your store on, right? If we think about a regular retail store, and then they're putting in the credit card terminals. Everything else is on you, right? On Etsy, they're doing a little bit more than that. They're handling all of the hosting. They're handling all of the website build, right? So don't take that as like, let me move everything over, but it is something to keep in mind when you start to sell on Shopify. You will actually take more away from the sale, at least when you get that sale organically. We can talk about ads and we'll get into that here in a minute. The other thing that I want to mention, Scott, as a pro, is there's more product types available. And I touched on this, right? We can set up subscriptions. We can sell private label. We can sell drop ship. We can add in a bunch of things that would be useful to our niche that we wouldn't be able to sell within the Etsy platform. And if our goal, and it should be, is to give our niche everything that would be useful to them, right? That's our growth path. We're going to be Chris's Awesome Fishing Store. I might start off selling some bass fishing stuff on Etsy, but if I want to be able to sell them everything, I need to move eventually to something like a Shopify, or be able to at least keep that in my arsenal so that I can sell the other product types, right? I don't necessarily want to be the person that's responsible for selling the bass fishing kayak. I don't want to like go source that. But if that's something that would be useful to my audience as someone who's selling to bass fishermen, I want the capability to be able to build that relationship to work with Bob's kayak shop and say, hey, if I sell one, will you send it to them? Right? That's drop shipping. And we can do that with something like Shopify. We can't do that using something like Etsy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's perfect sense. And yeah, it's like I said, there are a lot of pros, to using it. But I think the biggest thing, like you had kind of illustrated there, is in kind of the way, I guess another way to think about it would be like if you had a standalone brick and mortar, just in a certain location, you're like, well, traffic goes by there. Okay, great. But if you went into a mall that that there's traffic in there. Now, not that traffic might not be all targeted, but you're getting eyeballs, just like Etsy. Not all the traffic there is going to be for you, but you're getting into a flow of traffic that potentially could be for you. So that's kind of how I see it. It's like putting your shop all by itself and then having, traffic driving by, fine. Or you put it into a shopping mall where there's a lot of foot traffic, all the time. And then you're able to get in front of that. So it's a little different way of thinking about it. So let's get into the cons of Shopify. And here's what I got. Number one, you got to get your own traffic. We talked about that. You're going to have to learn traffic, whether that is organic traffic, SEO, which I think is harder than I think getting Google traffic, because that's really what you'd be doing is you're going to be trying to get in the search engines, okay, Google search engines, Bing, Yahoo, any of them, but you're really going to be trying to get in front of people when they're searching for those terms, right? And you'd be doing your keyword research in probably Google, because that's where you would want people to find you. So it's going to be learning that. It's going to be probably learning Google ads, because Google ads are going to be more for people searching to buy something in most cases. And you can target those people. And Chris knows a lot about that. So you got to learn that. Okay. Facebook ads, probably going to want to turn those on and learn that. So another thing you got to learn, and you got to spend money. And with ads, just so you guys know, usually if you're running ads and they're external, okay, and what I mean by that is like Etsy ads are internal. So when Etsy ads are running, you don't even really know they're ads to the person. They're there to buy anyway. With an external ad, a lot of times it's like an interruption of their day. Or if it was Google ads, they are searching for something, so they could find it. But you're basically now having to get a conversion of someone that doesn't know you, doesn't know the platform or any of that stuff. So it becomes harder. So having your own traffic is huge, and you don't have that right off the bat. And there's other things that you'll have to learn in order to get external traffic. So that's the number one con. The second thing is you have to create that merchant account. Okay. Now, yes, they have that built into Shopify, but it is still something that you will have to do and to look through and make sure that everything is connected and all of those things, right? Because you can't just go on there and say, I just want to sign up. There's going to be some type of background check. There's going to be banking that's associated with that, all of that stuff, just like Etsy, but not as, I guess not as, not as much has to go into it is what I'm trying to say, I guess. I don't know.
It's not as streamlined, and it's not quite as openly available as it is on Etsy, right? Like Shopify payments is a fairly easy platform to sign up for. I'd say it's, all of this stuff is getting easier, right? Like
it is.
5 years ago, even setting up Stripe was a lot more difficult than it is now, right? Yep. But Etsy, basically where you can sell on Etsy, and I know there's some limitations to this, guys, but where you can sell using Etsy, you pretty much have access to Etsy payments, right? Yeah. And if not, they have PayPal built in as an alternative for most other, most people who don't qualify for Etsy payments for whatever reason. Yep. On Shopify, their default is to use their credit card processing, which is not necessarily bad. And they're not gouging you on the rate, but there are extra limitations placed on that. And because Shopify is a place where you can build your own website, it's not available everywhere where you can use it. Does that make sense? So instead of like Etsy knows that all of the things that are being sold are within their terms of service. They don't even have to think about it, because otherwise they wouldn't let you list it as a product. On Shopify, because you have that extra control, they have extra limitations on the payment processing. because they know that you could be selling a subscription and then they have to deal with chargebacks or some of those kinds of things, right? Weird banking e-commerce stuff. It's just slightly more difficult for not really that good of a reason. And it's something you have to think about more than you do within the Etsy platform.
That's pretty much what I was trying to say. Good job, Chris. All right. So number 3 is you have to design the website. So there is more design that goes into it. Again, now they make it easy. Not saying that it's hard, but it's more work. And it is a learning curve. So, yes, it's easier on Etsy because there's less buttons, to push and less dials to turn. That's really what it comes down to. Number 4 is you have to manage the website for updates. So again, if there's an update on a certain plugin, because now that you can add plugins, there might be an update and you got to make sure that that's good. And that could screw up something else on your website. And then you have to troubleshoot all of that stuff. Generally, Etsy is going to be up about 99.9% of the time, right? So if something wasn't working, it's going to be fixed very, very quickly. And you really don't have to do anything about it, right? With the other, it's yours. You have to let people know that you're having a problem with it, right? Like you have to let support know on a certain plugin. Maybe it's a cross-sell plugin that you have that you're able to use. So anything like that, you will have to make sure that you're constantly on top of that. Not hard. A lot of times you'll get a little notification, hey, there's an update, but then sometimes you'll do the update and then it'll break something else. So then you have to go, oh, now what do I got to do? And then you got to call support. You're on the phone with support. Right, Chris?
Well, Scott, you may remember, what was this, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, you sent me a voicemail. You said, hey, I haven't heard from you in 2 days. Are you okay? And I said, yeah, I've just been dealing with exactly this issue, right? Yeah. So one of the e-commerce brands that I work with has a huge chunk of their business that is recurring revenue, and a plugin updated. And for whatever reason, it was still creating the orders in the back end of the site, but it wasn't sending it to the payment processor. So it wasn't sending them to Shopify payments, or in our case, I think they were using that site was using authorize.net, right? And so I had to go in manually and process $20,000 worth of orders, which took me 2 days. And it was because a plugin updated and it caused a down the chain issue. Now, does that happening twice a year, right, having to kind of buckle down and figure out a technology thing, outweigh all of the pros of that? No, because I can then turn around and sell that business, right? We have full control over it. We can increase customer value. We can increase customer retention. We can build deeper relationships with our customers, all of those kinds of things. But it is something you're going to want to keep in mind, in that if you are not a techie person, you're going to want to have a techie person that you can call. And it may be as simple as finding somebody on Fiverr that is highly rated for Shopify gigs, right? But if you don't understand what I mean when I say HTML, CSS, or Liquid, you're going to want to have a tech person on standby, even if it is just like a highly rated Fiverr gig of somebody that can jump in and poke around. That is not something you would ever have to worry about on the Etsy side, because Etsy limits the web design, right? They limit all of those things. And even, Scott, even a few weeks ago when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, there was like a 2-day delay in some payments from Etsy because it was one of a bunch of different banks that they use specifically to avoid that being a down the chain problem. When we're running our own site with something like Shopify, that's something that we have to pay attention to. So it's not a deal killer by any stretch, but it's definitely something people want to be aware of.
Totally. All right. So wrapping up with the cons, I got one more. It's pretty much like the last one. You have to install plugins for certain features. So there's things that you'll have to install in order to make something work the way you want it to work. So if you did want to do cross sells and things, well, there's probably a plugin that you're going to install for that, right? So there's different features that you will want that you will add a plugin for. And that's a benefit in the sense that you're able to do it. But the con is it's another thing that can break. It's another thing that can, that could really take your site and make it not function well. So things like that, so that you have to kind of stay on top of it. Like I said, with your updates and things like that. So every time you add a plugin, some type of thing, right, that's kind of bolted onto your shop, it's another area that could also need attention, that could be 3 hours on the phone with support, right? So just keep in mind that those are the things. So those are the pros and the cons, how I see it, how Chris sees it for Etsy and Shopify. They're both great platforms, but the big thing that I want you to remember is that Etsy and Shopify are different in a sense that the traffic is built into Etsy. The traffic is not built into Shopify. All right. And the ease of use, I mean, Etsy hands down. Someone asked a question in the chat and they wanted to know, what would be your recommendation for someone starting from scratch, a child, a kid? Etsy, hands down. Like literally, a kid could navigate that so easily without even trying. I mean, the way that the kids use iPads and computers nowadays, it's like Etsy, it's really, really simple, right? And I think they built it for a 5-year-old. I really do.
What's the average advice or the advice about writing, right? It should always be written at a 6th grade level, not because that's where most people's education stops, but that's where comprehension stops, right? Because we just get involved in so many other things. And I think I would say Etsy, as long as the thing they want to sell, 1, is allowed on Etsy, and 2, is being sold successfully on Etsy, right? Like if they're going to pioneer something, I'd rather they pioneer it on Shopify and get all of the upside rather than, some of the upside. But outside of that, I don't care if it's a kid, it's my mom, it's my next door neighbor, as long as what they are selling is sellable on Etsy and has sales and a following on Etsy of some sort, right? Going through the niche and product validation process that Scott and I talked about, then Etsy. And why? Because it allows us to then be able to pay for things like having Fiverr guy number 8 on standby for when I screw something up on Shopify. Or it allows me to start building up my war chest to then go run Google ads, or to start to pay to have content created if I don't want to do that myself, right? Etsy for 99% of people is going to be the place to start, and it's the place they should start. If you can get early wins on Etsy, it makes everything else a lot easier to manage. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah, it does. And to me, it just comes down to keeping it super, super simple when you are starting. When you're starting, the biggest thing that is going to get you hung up, besides finding your niche and your products, is tech, right? It's like, oh, I want to get these things up there, but I can't because it's giving me an error for uploading or something, right? It's not going to really happen with Etsy. So to me, it's like, how can we reduce the friction to getting started? And then from there, the other thing that I like about using Etsy is you're able to test a lot of products very quickly. And you know what? It costs you 20 cents for 3 months. And once you get some products that are doing well, maybe that's the time that you open up your Shopify, right? That's maybe when you graduate.
So that begs the question, and I know somebody's going to ask it if they haven't already. When do I move to Shopify, or when do I add in Shopify? And to me, you should never be moving off of Etsy, right? That should always kind of serve as the foundation. And Scott, to your point, it's a great place to test products. Obviously, I can't test a kayak on Etsy unless I make it myself, but I can test everything else fishing related and validate that it's going to sell to my audience who's already going there to buy it, right? So then we don't have to worry about spending money on ads. We just spend 20 cents to put it up on Etsy and we see if it sells. And if it does, then I go invest in offsite ads. But if we can get those early wins, then we can move. The question is, when do I add that in, right? So is it when I have 5 sales a day? Like when would you suggest that somebody who has some sales on Etsy try something like adding in their own website? And is it for everybody?
I think the last part of what you just said is the big question. Is it for everyone? Like, what is your goal? Are you just trying to make $1,000 a month profit? So this way here, you can have a little side hustle. Probably just keep it simple. Keep it on Etsy, right? Like, you're not planning on selling it. You just want to make some extra money. I maybe going off and doing Shopify doesn't even make sense, right? I would say personally, and I mean for us right now, so we have a website that is not on Shopify. It's a blog. Actually, we started producing content, and again, our story, I'm not going to go over it, but we've shared it here on the podcast and on YouTube before. But basically, we started this brand, and if you guys know, we always talk brand because we're not creating like a trend, or a trendy, product suite that we can just capitalize on today. But we started with attention by publishing content. like publishing blog content. And we did that first and then bolted on Etsy as a revenue stream. And now, okay, we're at the place where we did move some of our best sellers over to Shopify, but we actually just did it to get them there, right? We haven't even focused on that. Now, should we? Probably. But honestly, I don't want to deal with it right now. I've got too many other things going on. So for my wife, she's happy. She gets to create. She gets to put stuff up there. It's a nice side, business, right? And then I'm building over here, brand creators, and we're doing this whole thing. And I like reporting and documenting. So Shopify's there. We have one. Haven't really done a lot with it. So for us, it's really just about what we want to focus on right now. And I think it does come down to, are you planning on selling the business in the future? If you are, then it's probably a good idea to start doing that now and getting that built so you can start getting your own traffic, maybe organically. And someone had asked this question, Chris, and we'll probably answer it right here in this little discussion was, like, is Shopify just an e-commerce site, or is it a place where you can post, like on a website? And the answer is, yeah, it's got a blog feature built right in. So you can literally post content, right? You can publish how-to articles or, 9, best Father's Day gifts for bass fishermen. Like if that's the thing you're selling, right? You would create a post on that. So you can do that and you'll get indexed. And some have said that on Shopify, you get indexed pretty good in Google because it's a very reputable hosting. So yes, you can, and you should, right? I don't believe it should just be an e-commerce. I think there should be some content kind of thrown in there.
Yeah, so they are a full-fledged website builder that focuses on e-commerce sites. So you have the ability to create content pages, blogs, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But it's e-commerce first versus something like WordPress, which is blog first, e-commerce second.
Yep.
Right. So to me, Scott, when people should move over comes down to kind of a 3-question test, right? First, what is your long-term goal? And we talked about this at the beginning. If your long-term goal is just to replace your mortgage payment or just to have a steady stream of income and you don't care about selling it down the road, then I don't know that you necessarily ever have to add it on. Now, if you want to increase that revenue stream and you don't see that happening on Etsy because you've run out of products or whatever, right? You rank number 1 for every search term in your niche, then maybe take a look at it. But the people who really should be taking a look at adding in Shopify would be people who have a long-term goal of selling that business and growing it to a point where they can have a nice payday at the end of this. And the reason, well, obviously you can't sell an Etsy store, but the real reason for that, and the real reason you would want to focus on that if that is your long-term goal, is the more data you have there, the better off you are. And the more data that a buyer can look at, right, the higher potential value your business would have. So the sooner we start that, the better, right, if that's our long-term goal. Now, when do we actually pull that lever comes down to the other 2 things. First, what is your level of tech tolerance? And I'm not going to call this technical capability. I wrote this down, Scott, as tech tolerance, because Shopify is very easy to use and also extremely frustrating, because sometimes the button that says that it does one thing doesn't do what you think that word means that it should do, right? And there's some weird things that will happen when you're doing it. And so I think just about anybody can figure out how to build a Shopify store. But if you are not a patient person technologically, you're going to want to hire somebody to do it for you, which is not an extremely expensive thing, but it is something that you're going to want to budget for, which means if you are not a tech tolerant person, meaning you don't like clicking around and figuring out how new software works, you're going to want to have a steady base of sales. And I'd like to see at least 5 sales a day consistently coming in on your store with that $10 profit before you start to really think about building that out. If it's not something you're going to take on yourself, right, Scott? Like in our case, I just went ahead and did it because I've done it before, right? And we built it over the course of a weekend. We took all the products that we had on Etsy, moved them to Shopify, recreated the listings, recategorized everything, right? But if that was my first time ever having used Shopify, that process would have taken me 2 weeks of nothing but doing that. But because I've done it before and I have some of that tech tolerance, I was able to do that in just a few days. If you don't, and you have to pay somebody for it, get that foundation of sales. And then the third is, how much time do you have, right? If you are still in design, creation, product launch mode on Etsy, do not take on another product.
Yeah.
or another project rather.
Yep.
Right. It's like we were talking right before we got on, right? If you have ever read the book, if you give a mouse a cookie, right? If you give a mouse the cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. If you give Mr. Volker here a little bit of a construction project, he's going to end up renovating a bathroom, right? And that's what will happen. Your time will just get drug out on that. You go, well, I just want to change this one thing. And 6 hours later, you realize that you've wasted 6 hours trying to change the blue button to green or whatever it is. And you could have used that same 6 hours to launch more products. So once you have that stable foundation of sales, you have some designs that you're launching, but you're not in like a design heavy mode and you're not in fourth quarter sales fulfillment mode, then take a look at that. So if your long-term goal is to sell, get yourself a solid foundation and then get out of the daily product creation, product launch phase of your business. And that will vary depending on your business and your niche. And then consider taking that on as a project.
Yeah. I would say this, being on Etsy is going to be like just easier for you to navigate and to list products. Like you should just be in product creation, product listing mode. Like, or even if you just wanted to do that in like sprints, right? Like do it for 30 days, then back off, take a break, do it for 30 days. And I mean, you could take one design, put it on 6 different products too. That counts. But I think time is spent better there than worrying about, like Chris said, like what button or color or design should I put on my button? What button's going to perform better? Like any of that stuff, right? So that's what I think there. But I do think what anyone should be doing, even if they're just on Etsy, is they should start learning marketing, and they should start learning the number one thing is email marketing. That is something that we have used in all of the businesses, all of the brands, going all the way back to when my wife and I owned a photography business, and then brought that online, and then just learned it and have been doing it and still use it to this day. I mean, I sent out 3 separate emails to 3 separate brands this morning, right? So, I'm using it every day. I believe in it. And I think that's the one asset that you always have and that you always control. So that would be the thing I would say. If you have that little urge that you want to do a little more, it's get that email thing going, because that will drive more sales to your Etsy shop. And that will be more bang for your buck as far as then trying to set out on your own in a sense and be like, all right, I'm here. I got my Shopify store up. Now I got to learn traffic. But when you're learning the traffic, the thing that you're going to learn very quickly on traffic is it's going to be still getting the email and getting, or getting the customer to be able to communicate with that customer on a regular basis. And you'll get all this fancy automation that you can build into everything using Klaviyo or some other fancy email marketing platform. So this way here, you can do all of that stuff. But in the very beginning, like it would be trying to capitalize on building an email list. And then from there, learning how to email market to those people in a cool way, by the way, not in a spammy way.
I think that is probably, first of all, it's absolutely the number one underrated skill that anybody in the e-commerce world can have, right? And I see a lot of Klaviyo accounts. I see a lot of email accounts in the e-commerce side of things that I do. And most people do this very poorly. The nice thing is, and Scott, we mentioned this in some of the pros about Etsy, right? Even though there are massive limitations on what you can do within marketing on Etsy, you get to dip your toe in the water. This is an area where, because you are able to take Etsy customer emails, as long as they agree to be emailed by you, into Aweber. And then if you want to use Aweber, you can, or you can use whatever email marketing platform you like. We prefer to use something like ConvertKit because it's a little bit more user-friendly. It's easier to understand. And they now integrate with Shopify, by the way, Scott. You can go as deep as you want and master that. And even in 2023, Scott, and I know there are a bunch of people that are yelling and screaming, I can't believe you're talking about email marketing, right? It's 2023. What about SMS? What about this? What about that? Email marketing, and I can't say 2023 because we're in April, but in 2022, just like every year I've ever seen before that, when they survey e-commerce businesses, the number one return on investment channel for driving your own traffic is what? Email marketing. And Etsy lets us go as deep as we want down that rabbit hole. So before you even think about building a Shopify or building your own website, if you can master the basic principles of email marketing, right? Not always selling, keeping people up to date, doing all of the kinds of things, Scott, that you and I have talked about, It makes your life a lot easier. And then you're also not alone, right? And Scott, you used the example of like building your store in a mall versus building it on, like next to a highway as the only thing there. You're no longer just the only thing there. You have a giant flashing billboard, right? Like you have something that's at least going to attract people over to the Shopify site. And just like within Etsy, you know how the Etsy algorithm that we've been talking about, guys, you get sales and that helps you get more sales. Once you have customer data coming through Shopify, it makes running ads and doing all of those things a lot easier because we can use things like lookalike audiences. We can use, whether it's Facebook or AdWords, right? Like whatever ad, TikTok, whatever ads channel we decide to then use becomes easier to use because we can do less work and not have to guess, right? And so because Etsy's building that in, that to me would be the number one skill I would suggest anybody learns before they invest in that. Closely behind that, and somebody just mentioned in the comments that Etsy is asking if people would like to have a blog feature in their survey that they just sent out to Etsy sellers, would be content creation. But the very first thing that I'd want to see anybody master is that email marketing, because even if you never want to write a blog article, you don't have to. You can have that email list, and you could, if you really wanted to, just use Etsy to feed people into that email list and then take that email list and push them over to your website and get all the benefits of having that. So if you master that as your first traffic channel, one, it's pretty easy to get the basics. Yes, there's some really cool like ninja upsell, cross-sell, marketing automation things that you can do. And anytime people talk about Klaviyo, they talk about all the different segmentation. My list is really well segmented. Yeah, but you're not sending them emails, right? They forget the basics because of all of the advanced stuff. Yep. If you can master the basics, which is send emails like a human being, like you would be sending an email to a friend, then once you have that down, you have a built-in traffic source for Shopify, whatever else it is that you want to do. And Etsy gives you all of the tools to be able to do that and trip and fall along the way without having to worry about your whole business going under.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could talk email for days. And we actually have a playbook, our email, perfect email formula playbook, which we've used and we continue to use. And it talks about how to build a list and from scratch, not even using Etsy. And then from there, sending emails and all that stuff, and really what we've done. If you guys are interested in that, I don't have the link handy, but if you are interested in that, Chris has the link. I think he does. But if you
brandcreators.com/email.
Okay. So just brandcreators.com/email, and that should take you to the playbook, and it's free. So if you would like to get a copy of it, just go there, and no strings attached. It's a free book that we compiled, and I forget how many pages it is, but it basically gives screenshots and everything on how to set it up and how we're building a list from scratch and how we've done it numerous times in numerous niches. So definitely check that out if you're at all interested. It is free. Like I said, I will say this as well. Make sure that you give us a little love on this live stream or this podcast. If you are here live, do me a favor, smash that old like button. Let us know in the comments, what was your biggest takeaway from today's episode? We would love to hear from you, and that would also help us in the old YouTube algorithm, and it'll help us reach more people. So we would really, really appreciate that. That's how you guys can pay us. Just hit that old like button. That would be awesome. All right. So Chris, anything else you want to wrap up with before we sign off for the day?
Yeah. So Scott, is there ever a case where you would suggest somebody starts on Shopify versus starting on Etsy?
No, I don't think that there is. And the reason why is because no matter if you started on Shopify or you started on Etsy, or you didn't start, let's say you started on Shopify and you were like, I'm just going to go here and just put all my effort in here. It's like, why wouldn't you have that be another channel, right? Like, as long as, like Chris said, the products that you're selling would do well on Etsy, that's where we would do our product research and all of those things. Now, if it wasn't going to do well, then obviously go to Shopify and start learning marketing and learning how to run ads and start reaching those people that would be interested in your product. So that would be the only case. I just think that it's just such an easy channel to get your stuff up in front of people. Very easy to navigate and kind of learn how to get this ball rolling. And then learn from there. And a lot of testing can get done there as far as products and things like that. So no, I would just say, yes, start on Etsy. And I would generally, I would say start there first, get that entity built out, start creating your products. And then if you wanted to, take those products and then port them over to your Shopify, which, by the way, I believe there's a plugin in Shopify that can actually port over your listings to your Shopify store.
Yeah, and it works about 80%. It was just because we were trying to do categorization and all of those kinds of things that made that a little bit more complicated for me. So, Scott, would that still be the case if somebody has an email list or like a following, whether it be a YouTube channel, a big Instagram? Would you still recommend that they start somewhere like Etsy because there's also the organic traffic built in? Or if they have that traffic fire hose that they control, be it an email list, a big Instagram, a YouTube following, would you still suggest they start on Etsy? Or because they have some built-in traffic, should they start on Shopify? Or doesn't it matter?
This is a great question. And here is my response. The cool thing about having your own traffic source, and this is a mistake that I see a lot of e-commerce sellers making, is they want all of the sales, all of the profit to just come to them, right? And they're like, well, you know what? If I put it on Etsy, I'm going to pay more in fees and it's going to cost me more for the transaction. I'm going to make more if I put it over on my own shop. But I'm still selling on Etsy, but I'm going to put all my traffic over here because that's where I make more money. Okay, great. The downside of that is I'm not getting any of the benefits of getting sales through Etsy. So we've talked about this before. If we want to get ranked on Etsy, a great way of doing this is to get sales. Well, if I have a fire hose of traffic that I can turn on at any time and run a promotion, even a 4-day promotion. And if you guys have done any of our email marketing strategies, like our little profit push promo, which usually runs for like 4 or 5 days, what we do there is then we can just direct it all there, spike the algorithm. Now we're going to start showing up in search better because we did that. But if I said, well, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to get my 20 sales over here on my website, and I made a little bit more money. Okay. Once that promotion's done, you're done, right? But if I did it over here on Etsy to spike the algorithm, that there could be a long tail effect, right? So that's why it really does depend on where you are in your journey. Because if you already have Etsy going and things are rolling, then maybe you don't. Maybe then you do point the hose over at your Shopify. But if you're brand new and you had that audience, I would start on Etsy, direct the traffic there, get yourself seasoned, get yourself known for making sales. Etsy will reward you by pushing you in the organic ranking. So hopefully that made sense.
It does. And I think one thing that most people miss, Scott, yes, if you are Mr. Beast and you're launching Mr. Beast chocolate, right? Like you can't sell that on Etsy. So if the product you sell or that you want to sell to your existing audience is not a fit for Etsy, obviously you're not going to start on Etsy. That doesn't make any sense. But if you have the ability to do that and you already own the traffic, and that's one of the main reasons you want to have your own website eventually, like if you want to sell the business, right? If you want to have larger customer acquisition or larger customer values and some of those kinds of things, you want to be able to own and control that traffic. That is the resource. If you already own and control that traffic and you're sending them to your site and that's your starting place, right? Then you're losing out on the ability to use that to grow bigger long-term. The difference that I think, or like the thing I think most people miss in this, Scott, is if I say, hey, go buy my thing on Etsy, and they go buy it on Etsy, we do get the long-term benefit of those sales and that data going into Etsy, which is going to help us rank higher organically. I don't have to always send my YouTube following or my Instagram followers or my email list to Etsy. But if I'm trying to get started and I know that that's going to be a valuable platform for me to have long-term, even if my goal long-term is to also have a Shopify site or also to have a WooCommerce site or also to build out a Magento site or a BigCommerce site, I might want to consider sending them to Etsy to start with, to jumpstart that whole process and get around the stupidity of if you build it, they will come, waiting for the search algorithm to bless our listings, all of those kinds of things. And it doesn't hurt us long-term. It only helps us long-term to be able to do that. So if what you're selling, even if you have an existing audience, is sellable on Etsy, consider driving them to Etsy to start with. And Scott, I know we'll have somebody in the comments that'll say, but I heard somewhere else that if you drive external traffic to Etsy, that is a bad thing. And the answer is if no one buys anything, then yes, that is a bad thing. But if you're driving traffic to your own website and they're not buying anything, that's also a bad thing, right? We might as well take advantage of the traffic that's the most likely to buy from us. If we have a list, we have an email list, we have a YouTube channel, we have an Instagram following, theoretically, they want to buy something from us if we have it for sale. And if they're clicking on the thing that we're telling them to click on, some of them want to buy something. We're going to get at least a few of them to convert, and that's going to help us jumpstart on Etsy. So don't worry about it. But if Etsy works for you long-term, consider driving them there first. A week from now, a month from now, a year from now, we can point them to our website to really start to accelerate that in the same way that we accelerated Etsy. But we don't get the same long-term benefits with the algorithm, right? Shopify doesn't care, and they don't have a deal with Google where if your Shopify store sells more products, you rank higher on Google. That's not how that works, right? Shopify just sits back and collects their 2.9 plus 30 cents, and they're happy with that, plus their $29 monthly fee or whatever it is. And so they don't care how much you sell. Etsy does. And if you're able to sell more on Etsy, Etsy gives you more traffic, which gives you more sales. So I would focus there first, kind of regardless, as long as it's something you can sell within the Etsy terms of service.
Yeah. No, I agree. Anything else we want to mention here before we wrap up for this podcast session?
What are your thoughts on starting something in the love or relationship niche? I would say love is probably not a niche, right? Like relationships, like relationship counseling, repairing relationships, healthy relationships, that might be a niche, but it's not what I would typically define as a niche, right? Mm-hmm. People don't say, I love love. Like maybe they do, but it's not the same way like I love fishing or I am fishing. You might say I am in a relationship, but do you identify that way? In some circumstances, yes. In some circumstances, no. If it's something you are extremely passionate about, there's definitely a way to do it. You're not necessarily going to be selling "I love my wife" T-shirts on Etsy. Although, well, I mean, you probably could. Good. Most of those would probably be bought as like a joke by the husband for the wife or by the wife for the husband, right? Like, we need to wear this, and they have the arrows that point to each other, something like that. But if you want to sell like informational products, some of those kinds of things, you probably would want to build that outside of Etsy, because you're going to have to do a lot more marketing. It's not something people are necessarily searching Etsy for, right? If that makes sense. Like, I don't know how many people are going to Etsy typing in "men are from Mars, women are from Venus," right? Like that's not where people go to look for relationship advice. So if it's more on the advice side, I'd probably start that outside of Etsy. If it's more on the, like you have a way that people are identifying that they're in a couple, something like that, then yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think like that comes down to like, you might have a passion for something, but is there an angle in that's already being searched for on Etsy? And that's what we talk about all the time. It's like demand. Like, it's great that you have that passion, but is there people searching around that passion that you could deliver a print on demand product or a digital product, and that's really what it comes down to. So it's always looking at search traffic and what people are searching for. Is it in demand? And that's kind of how you base that decision off of, but that's what I would say there. All right. And one last quick question here. What about selling on other platforms like Redbubble along with Etsy? I'm concerned that I might have a legal issue with Etsy. I don't know why you would.
Yeah, the only legal issue you could have with Etsy that would stop you from selling on other platforms would be that you're selling things that violate Etsy terms of service, like a shirt with a Mickey Mouse on it. In which case you'd also be violating Redbubble's terms of service and everybody else's terms of service. So there's no exclusivity to Etsy. There is to some extent in the Amazon ecosystem, like with KDP, Scott, right? Like they have a thing where it's like, if you're in the KDP program, you can only sell your book on Amazon for a certain amount of time. But Etsy doesn't have anything like that I'm aware of. You can definitely sell on other platforms. And there's actually a handful of tools that I've seen that allow you to do like multi-listing, right? So you create the listing one time, it goes to Merchize, Redbubble, all of the different places. But from just what I've seen, our experience and what I'm hearing from other sellers, like if you're going after the t-shirt angle, then maybe listing somewhere like Redbubble or like you're creating 1 million mugs, going there might be useful. But I would focus, make Etsy the focus.
Make one your focus.
In terms of where that is, and then consider listing other things. So Scott, that actually brings up an interesting side question really fast. Should they look at another marketplace? So we're selling well on Etsy. Should I then move directly to Shopify, or should I look at another marketplace that I could add on? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would look, but again, I'd have to see like what is the upside. And again, once I go on another channel, I'm now dependent on that channel, or at least, I can't sell off, I can't sell that entity. So I would say it would have to be a strong channel, not just like I'm going to add like 5 extra sales a month, right? Unless it was, well, I'm going to put it up there. There's very little I have to do. Or maybe it's going to, upload. You have a tool that's going to upload to Etsy and upload to another platform. And then you're just going to do it that way. But you got to remember, every time you add another platform in there, you also have another area you have to check every day. You have to do support every day. You have to make sure that you're on top of it. There's probably more SEO that goes with it. So I would say, personally, I would pick one, and let's say it is Etsy. Then from there, I would focus on the Shopify thing, because it is going to be the thing that will give you the most benefits later. Okay. But yeah, I would say probably only if it had strong numbers that I thought I could go in there and there was a ton of traffic and sales. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I like that. I think for most people, I'd be looking at Shopify second. And then something like Redbubble, just because of the difference in the amount of revenue it can bring into the business, right? If you get Shopify up and running and you're doing even a mediocre job at marketing, the return on the investment that you can get from that is substantially higher than it would be from another platform, especially something like Redbubble, where once something starts selling well on the platform, you tend to get a lot of copycat people, because they are doing nothing but creating t-shirts, mugs, whatever, right? On a platform like that. Carl wanted to know, Scott, is there a reputable outlet to find designers for print-on-demand t-shirts? Anywhere you can find a graphic designer, right? There's no special skill involved in creating a design for a print-on-demand t-shirt. So Fiverr, Upwork, any of those kinds of places, as well as give it a whack yourself. I'm terrible at graphic design, but I can use Kittl, I can use Canva to be able to create those things without really any hassle. And then I don't have to go find somebody.
You could also go check out our workshop that we did. Another little shameless plug here, guys, brandcreators.com/AI, which was basically a 2-hour workshop where we showed how to design using AI, and really build out a design using either for elements or for a complete design. So it's another resource for you. We did teach that to a live class, but now it's available. The recordings are anyway, and you can go through that. So if you're interested, check that out, brandcreators.com/AI. All right. And let's wrap this up with, if you're watching this or listening to this and you want to be part of our Rock Your Brand community, you can head on over to brandcreators.com/group. If you're on the podcast, you might want to come over. You get to hang out with us live, ask some questions live, but you can always listen on the podcast as well. All right. So that is going to wrap this up, our little Etsy versus Shopify. Hopefully this was useful for you guys. And once again, do me a favor, slam that, don't even just hit it, just slam it, that little heart button there or the like button, and give us a little bit of love and let us know that this was valuable. And also, if you are here live or watching on the replay, go ahead and drop in the comments, what was your biggest takeaway from today's episode? And if you're listening to this on the podcast, go over to iTunes and let us know in the reviews, what was your biggest takeaway? All right. So that is going to wrap up this episode. I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We truly appreciate it. And as always, take care, take action, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, guys.